What's going on, my babies? Welcome back to another episode of The Spiritual Word. As always, I apologize for any noises in the background in advance and anything of that nature. And as always, I like to start these off with a disclaimer by stating that these are for entertainment purposes only, and to always do your own research, to come to your own conclusions, to make your own decisions, and I believe in your ability to be your own person. So on today's episode, I am just going to be ranting and talking about the things that I feel I need to talk about and what that, whatever comes of that. So basically, something that I was getting today was how to be yourself, and something that I came into this, environment, and I was like, okay, what am I going to talk about today? I usually try not to plan these because I want them to be more raw, and more raw in the sense that it's like more human, and not this type of like business structure, which I'll probably get to. There's some episodes where I do structure these, but today I was like, I don't feel like doing that. And I usually go with whatever makes me feel the most excited to do this episode. Or to do these episodes. And today's episode got me to a point where I was like, okay, I'm going to talk about how to be yourself and what comes out of this. So basically today I was sitting here shuffling my tarot cards. And I was like, okay, guides, what should I talk about today? And as I was shuffling, I was like, oh, I need to talk about how to be yourself, because I have a good grasp on how to do that for myself, and maybe if I share some tips of how I did it, it'd help other people. So basically, there's no like clear way to state this, just because everything that I talk about is very loosely related to your personal experience, and that's why I always start these with the disclaimer by, you doing your own research and stuff like that. But I want to talk about that specifically because that's something that I feel like I should talk about. So, you are your own person. Everything that you relate to is your own personality. And everything that comes out of your expression of life is your said personality. Like, your name has a lot to do with your personality before you're even born. And regardless of whether or not you think that that's coincidental or whatever, or if you don't believe in astrology, or if you don't believe in numerology, and all those crazy things, they were here before you. So there's a little bit of history to those things. There's a little bit of truth to those things. Not to say that they're 100% true, because you could be named something, and that name, that personality that goes with that name could not fit you. So everything is very individually based, which is why I have that disclaimer. So moving past that, how do you be yourself? What's a tangible way of being yourself? First, you have to really recognize who you are and who you are to you yourself, because I know a lot of people in my like in my reality, I've experienced a lot of people who were like, oh, I hate myself and I'm a piece of shit and blah blah blah, and like really tearing themselves down. And to me, I was like, do you really think that of yourself? Or like, that's just your experience of what life has brought you, and you're taking the external and putting it inside of you? Because we all start out as a simple little kid. We all start out as this innocent little kid who has shit thrown at them. Like, everybody has traumas, everybody has gone through shit, especially if you're in your 20s. Especially if you're in your 20s, because that's where all of it kind of like comes out of you like throw up. All of your trauma just comes out of you like throw up, and you don't know what to do, because nobody teaches you how to deal with emotions and how to deal with all these crazy things that go on in your spiritual body. And so really take a look at yourself and think back to that little kid. Who was that little kid? What were their hopes and dreams? Because that little kid is the real you. Not what people have told you, not what you feel to be true, because your feelings and the truth are two separate things. So come from a place of being grounded and really sit with yourself and be like, okay, who am I? Who am I? What do I like to do? What do I do for fun right now? What do I enjoy doing? And for example, a lot of people think really poorly of themselves for really small things that everybody has like a thought of every once in a while. Like, I remember being friends with people who were like very suicidal, and the first time that I heard them just kind of like joke about suicide, I was like, okay, like that's really weird. And then the more that they did that, the more I was like, ugh, that's exhausting. Like, that's exhausting for you to be joking about, because at the end of the day, that's not a joke to you. And that's not something that you should use as a joke or whatever. And then the more that I came into realizing what they were feeling, I was like, oh, okay, you know what? They just feel like shit and they need a way to release it. And if they need a way to joke about what they're going through, then they're going to do that, especially if they're not used to or comfortable with expressing their emotions. And then I kind of like, I have a tendency to grab onto other people's emotions to understand what they're going through so that I can better help another person who's going through the similar things. So I got to a place where I was like, okay, I pretty much understand why people think that they're pieces of shit, because either they themselves have been pieces of shit and haven't forgiven themselves, or other people have been pieces of shit to them, and so they think that they deserve it because they are a piece of shit. And maybe you've done some questionable things where you're like, yeah, I am a piece of shit. Like, I've done this thing, and I can't forgive myself for that, and I'll never forgive myself for that. So think back to that innocent little kid. Think back to that 1-year-old. Think back to that 5-year-old. Think back to that 7-year-old. Whatever helps you the most. Think back to that little kid. That little kid did nothing wrong. And people think that when you grow, you're supposed to have this understanding of the world and you're supposed to know right from wrong and blah, blah, blah. But that's not truth. Because if that was truth, we wouldn't have wars. We wouldn't have suffering. We wouldn't have famine. We wouldn't have disease. These bad things in life wouldn't exist. Because we would be learning from our mistakes. But that's just not how we work. You can look at a dog who's trained and they're still going to mess up. Something that one of my spiritual mentors taught me was you can be an expert at something, but it doesn't mean you're never going to mess up. And nobody on this earth, nobody on this plane of existence is an expert. Even the people who claim to be experts, even the people who are like gurus, even something that I always think about is even Gandhi was not a good person. And everybody praises Gandhi. Well, at least in like my community, you know? Like, for example, Gandhi used to beat his wife. He used to beat his wife. And somehow he was still a spiritual leader, a spiritual guider. He was this, you know, person that everybody looked up to. So think about those things before you judge yourself. Because the only person who's making you feel like shit is you. And I never understood why people did that until I got down to like the root cause of it. It's trauma. It's all the bullshit that you decided to carry on your back because you're like, if I carry this on my back, it means, I don't know, whatever it means. Whatever it means to you. And we've all done it. No judgment. But you need to let that shit go. And as hard as it is, you really do have to let that shit go, or else you'll never forgive yourself for being imperfect. And that is the world that we live in. We live in a world that's not perfect. How do you be yourself? Realize that you're not perfect. Don't force yourself to try to be perfect. That doesn't exist. And most people are, you know, feeling that way, and people who hate themselves especially have this like really high expectations of themselves and like what they've done. And so they don't forgive themselves because they're like, no, I could have done this better. I could have done this better. You could have, but in that very moment, you did what felt the right. You did what felt the best, not what's right necessarily. You did what felt good to you in that moment. Like, for example, I know people who were like, oh, I used to go out and do these heavy drugs, or I used to like drown out my sorrows by drinking. And I'm like, okay, that's what made you feel good in that moment. That's what kept you alive in that moment, because I know that those thoughts of yours, they only stay thoughts until you bring them into the real world. And I've known people who've tried to, tried to do some crazy things, and I've had people in my personal family who have done those things and who have tried to do those things. And so it's only a matter of time before you get yourself out of that little hole that you've dug yourself in. And one of those things that's huge that stops you from being your real self, something that stops you from being you, is all the fear that comes from, what am I doing? Am I doing this right? Am I doing this perfect? Or, the fear of, am I going to look like a dumbass? It's a lot of fear that stops you from being you. And it's a lot of, let me forgive myself because I'm not this person that everybody perceives me to be. The only person that knows you the best is yourself. And a bunch of different things can be stopping you. Like maybe you don't forgive yourself for things that you've messed up on, or maybe you're just fearful of like, oh, but if I am the real version of myself, then my friends won't be friends with me, or if I'm the real version of myself, then people are going to judge me, people are going to call me crazy, they're going to think all these things of me, they're going to think I'm acoustic or whatever. Who cares? Be yourself. And don't care. And not to the point where you're just like destructive for no reason, because that doesn't really work out in the long run. That doesn't have longevity to it. And the reason I say that is because if you look at, this is going to be like a very like heavy thing to say, but if you look at people like Jeffrey Dahmer or Hitler, their upbringing was them being destructive and destructive and destructive and destructive, and they didn't care, they didn't have any remorse, so they just continued to do that with no thought of anybody else. It got them to a point in their life where things just plummet. Why? Because you get what you give in the world. And I'm not saying that you have to take care of every single person in order to only receive good, but I'm saying care about yourself to an extent and care about other people to an extent. It's a balancing act. It's like when, I don't know, you have a kid or something, you have to care about the kid, but you also have to care about yourself, because if you're drowning, you can't really do anything for your kids. You know what I mean? Like if I'm dirt broke and I'm living on the street and I have a kid, that kid is living on the street with me. And, you know, if I'm taking care of myself and I'm doing good for myself, then that kid is taken care of. And it's like, it's that kid should be a representation of your inner child. Take care of your inner child. What would your inner child like to see in another person? Be that role model that your little kid version would have lived for. Be that role model that you would have wanted. And not for the sake of being that role model, but for the sake of being the best version of yourself. Because if you have that perception, like if you were this little kid and you're like, wow, if I was looking at myself from my little kid's point of view, like from younger me's point of view, I'd be really proud of myself. Because I'm living my life and I'm doing it authentically and I'm not hurting anybody and I'm not doing crazy out of pocket things. Like I'm not out there, you know, selling, or I'm not using, or, you know, stuff that I've seen happen around me that happens pretty consistently and pretty easily, and people just go into because they don't have a lot of options. And another thing that I've also realized is that, like, be your real self. Like, if that means, for example, me, I am not in college. I went to trade schools, but I didn't go to college. And, you know, everybody around me is like, oh, you're messing up because you could make such a big contribution to the world. You're so smart. You have so much potential. If you really stuck to something, you would be so great. And to me, I was, for a long time, I kind of beat myself up for it because I'm like, you know what, they're right. I could be doing so much, but here I am, like, not doing anything. But then I sat down and realized I am doing something. It's just not making that big of an impact as it would if I already had the connections, or if I already had whatever. Like if I had 1 million people listen to my podcast, that would be just as big of an impact as me going to college and changing something. And the more and more and more and more I kind of forgave myself for not going to college, the more I realized that I am making a big impact. It's just not coming out in the same way. Like, I'm impacting my friends, I'm impacting my family, I'm impacting my pets, and it's all been a really good impact, and I'm impacting the people that I come into contact with. Like, I can change one person's world by just simply showing them a bit of kindness. It's not all about these external things that people need. You know what I mean? Like for example, something that I struggled with for a long time was like, I'm not successful in the conventional sense. I'm not successful in the sense that I'm making money off of whatever contribution I can give to society. Like, for example, if you're a construction worker, you're building houses for people, that's a contribution to society. And you're getting paid to do that. But I'm not getting paid to do that because I'm not doing that. And it was hard for me to let that go because I was looking at it in a sense of like, oh, I'm a failure because I'm not contributing to society. But I am contributing to my circle, my piece, my little itty bitty corner of society that is my friends and my family. And I never looked at it that way. And the more that I got myself to feel my authentic self wants to do these podcasts. My authentic self does not want to go out and work and, contribute to society in the normal context. This person asked me what I see myself doing. And, people in my family always tell me, well, what's the point? What do you want to do? Where do you see your life going in years and years and years? Where do you see yourself in 20 years? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? And I can't tell them where I see myself because I try to live here. I try to live in the now because who knows? I could get hit by a truck tomorrow and all the hard work that I've ever done gone in a flash. And not in a pessimistic way, but in a way that, like, I'm going to be grateful for the moments that I have right now because those moments are to be worried about when they're here. And there's also good in the fact of planning, like I do have like an overall arching theme, like, oh, I want my podcast to be successful in the next 5 years. I want to get myself into strategies where I have enough money to go out and buy a piece of land because I don't want to take out any financial support and I don't want to have credit. And I don't want to associate myself more with this society than need be. And if that doesn't work, then I also see myself traveling because what are you going to do, And I know in the conventional sense that my life seems very irresponsible to most people, which is something that made me fearful of being myself because I was like, I seem like I'm a really reckless person. I seem like whatever I'm doing is just for the moment, just for the thrills of it. But most of the time I'm worried about my next day because of all the ways that people are like, oh, you should be worried about your next day. Like, where's the money coming from? What are you doing? You don't have your head on right. The wheels are turning, but the mouse is dead. You know what I mean? And for a long time, that made me feel like shit because I was like, oh, maybe they're right because I'm not doing what everybody else is doing. And then I sat back and I was like, but you know what? I'm still living my authentic self. And I'm grateful for all of the moments that I have here because one day I won't be here. And what will be the purpose of stressing myself out continuously to be unhappy? Most people are not happy where they are. And I know that for a fact because if you were happy, you wouldn't have negativity to spare. You know what I mean? Like, most people who talk shit about me are people who are miserable in their lives. And they want me to do what they're doing because it feels right to them. It feels grounded to them. It feels like if I make a paycheck today, I'm doing something right. Because you need money in this world to survive, which has its truth, it has its validity. But I can also get money through cash. I can also get money through trading. I can also get money through selling things that I personally make for free. And it's not all about this paper, check that everybody needs to write on their tax forms. Life is not all about money. Life is not all about all these things that people swear that they need. It's not about the material. It's about what you live. And most people are not living. And so that's where I kind of like meet myself again. And I'm like, oh, okay, my true authentic self is somebody who doesn't look conventionally put on straight. Like, I'm not somebody who looks like I have it all together. Even though maybe if you're like a random stranger, you might look at me and be like, oh, that person looks like they have money. They look like they have it figured out. They could think that or not. Not my opinion. Or not my, problem. But at the same time, it doesn't really matter because my authentic self wants to live peacefully. And I'm not going to force myself to do things that I don't want to do, especially if I'm not hurting anybody. in the process of being my authentic self. Like, if my authentic self wants to go for a walk, how is that so wrong? And something that helped me be my authentic self is to stop judging myself, because most people who are judging you are judging themselves, like, like, hard, or they've been judged. And most people are just putting their trauma onto you. That's why I always say, take everything that I say with a grain of salt, because I could be dumping trauma onto you. You know what I mean? Like, I could be that person that's like, oh, you should do your own thing, and then you go and you do your own thing, and it doesn't work out for you. So, how to be your authentic self, to put this into a clear, concise little piece. Be yourself, get to know yourself, trust yourself, and don't be scared to be yourself. What does that mean to you? You have to figure that out. And it's not that hard. Just look at that little kid. What was that little kid's hopes? What was that little kid's dreams? What did it do when nobody was looking? What do you do when the door's closed? When you're locked away in your room? What do you do when you're in the shower? What do you think about? And don't judge yourself, because they're just things that you think about. Pretty much any person and every person has had that same thought. And if you think otherwise, you think you're special for arrogant reasons. You think you're that much of a piece of shit, that nobody has ever been a piece of shit, even though people like Hitler exist every day. They just don't go out and act on their thoughts. So, really release judgment. Release all those things that are holding you back. Release all those things that you see as wrong and right, because there's no such thing as wrong or right. We just put it there for us to understand what the fuck is going on. Because, to be honest, we're on a floating rock. So, all this shit does have some validity. But for the most part, we just made it up. We just put context. So, whatever that means to you, go through it. Get to know yourself. Get to know yourself on a deeper level. Ask yourself, what do you want to do today? What do you like to do? Ask yourself, what's your favorite this? What's your favorite that? Play 21 questions with your damn self if you don't know anything about yourself. Which, probably not likely. But if you really want to get to know yourself and live in your authenticity, get to know yourself. Be vulnerable with yourself. As hard as that is, because I know people stress with that. So, yeah. And also, meditate. I know that every spiritual person is like, blah, 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 meditate, 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 meditate. But it does things for you. And not only does it do things for you, it puts you in a state where you're calm, you're at peace, and you're not like running around in circles in your mind because it's, you're lost in there. It's a place where you could sit down and be like, oh, okay. It's kind of like if you're chilling in a jacuzzi. It puts you in a state of like, relax. You could be thinking about a billion different things. And then you just sit there and you're like, okay, let me just watch these billion different things go with no attachment to them. And when I say no attachment, I mean, you're not worried about whether or not you left the light on, because you can get to it. Right now, it's about being here. And that's what meditating does. It's like, okay, let's go chill in the jacuzzi for a little bit. Because you seem like you need a day of relaxing. You need a little bit. So with that being said, I'm in this here. Thanks for tuning in and tapping in. This has been The Spiritual Word. I have been your host. And if you found these entertaining, or if you found this helpful, I'd recommend subbing or following whatever platform you're on. This is on every single podcast platform. And I upload Mondays and Fridays at 8 p.m. Mountain Time. So if this is something you're interested in, I'd recommend, following. And yeah, thanks for tuning in and tapping in. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.